thank you all for coming. What a lovely crowd to turn up tonight. I'm honored. Thank you so much. I'm just getting used to doing the readings and things. I've been in seclusion a lot of the time. I wouldn't have known COVID happened if someone hadn't told me, or I didn't see those masks every month when I went to Fort Kent. I had to go to do some lab work every month because this thing that I suddenly called autoimmune hepatitis that I got from, I think, stress of writing the Einstein book. So I had to go once a month, or I would not have known COVID was going on. And that's another thing. When I wrote this book, I was in Allagash. I never left Allagash. And in many ways, I thought, well, you know, it's probably better that I tried to imagine these towns in 1952 than to go and visit them today. Because I was looking at all old pictures and listening to music from the 1950s and looking at cars. Weren't cars great back then? They had personalities. They had like pissed off looks, and you know, you could almost tell when somebody was mad. I lived with a musician from in Nashville for 17 years. The Glazer Brothers. Anyone here? The Glazer Brothers? Tom Paul and the Glazer Brothers? Yeah. Jim wrote "Woman, Woman, Have You Got Cheating on Your Mind" by Gary Puckett and Union Gap. His father was a farmer, and they had a 1,200-acre spread, and the kids would say, "Oh no, here comes Dad," and they'd see his pickup coming, and Jim said, "I swear to God, we knew if he was mad or wasn't mad by the grill. We could tell by the grill." Now cars are anonymous, aren't they? Yeah. I mean, I think of this often. On the playground at school, we knew each other by our winter jackets, right? We only got one jacket, one really good coat for the winter, usually by picking potatoes. And we knew each other by our cars. And now people go by and toot, and I go, "Oh, hi." And I think that's probably somebody saying, "Let's see if we can get the idiot to wave." An enemy or something. But here's what I thought I'd do tonight. Read a couple of minutes about each character, because there are a lot of characters, and I'm used to that with fiction. I wrote a book called The Weight of Winter, and most of my Madagash books have a lot of characters, so I kind of got used to doing that, working from one to another. So I always worry about the reader staying with me, because that takes a lot of investment to stay with characters. And then I wanted to write about the history of towns. So let me tell you a little bit, for those of you who haven't read the book, and the test is Monday, I get reading. Let me tell you a little bit about my characters. And this is not really the lyrical part of the book that really gets into the drama. This is just setting up the characters. They're children, and we have one here tonight, only he didn't help me. I didn't know him at the time. Where'd he go? Dan Speed Jr. is here tonight, and his father is not a major character in the book, but a darn big one, and one of my favorites. His sister Becky helped me with some pages from her father's diary and stuff. So I became friends with the children of a lot of these people. They're in their 70s and 80s now, and one wasn't born when the storm hit. He was born, his mother was expecting him, so he was born just after. And they all became sort of friends, even though I've only met one in person. So far, I'm going to meet them all. So the first one is Hazel, who lived on Isle-a-Ho. Is that how that's pronounced? Yep. Not Eel, but Isle-a-Ho. And she was the one that, if you've read any of the stories or any of the things about the book that's been out lately in the papers, she was the one who ends up being the pregnant woman on the toboggan. Born in 1917, Hazel grew up a short distance from Coombs Mountain, named for the first family member to settle on the island. She had gone to a one-room grammar school and attended the community's one church. For entertainment, there were dances held at the town hall. Hazel loved the island. Its forests thick with conifers, where her father, a fisherman, hunted for game to help feed his family. Deer and rabbit were a welcome change from the lobster and cod he took from the sea. One winter she said they ate only lobster. There were low-lying hills and even meadows that bordered the forest. Granite boulders that the eons had sculpted into smooth, rounded shapes hugged the coastline. There were cormorants and sleek seals and loons calling out from the hidden coves. Her friends called her Hazy. By the way, I found her high school yearbook. A lovely woman in Portland High School, went back to 1935 and found it and sent me the pages that Hazel was mentioned. Her children didn't know that her nickname was Hazy. They'd never heard that before. And there it is in the book, Hazy, next to her picture. Her friends called her Hazy She was never lonely as a child and could have stayed there forever, but island kids dream of a future that can only be found on the mainland. Hazel Coombs wanted to be a nurse. In autumn of 1932, when she was 14, she packed up her best clothing and she left Isle of Haut. A small steamer named the Daydream was visiting the island by then, but it was reserved only for the wealthy rusticators coming to Point Lookout. That's what they were called back then, rusticators, looking for rustic stuff, I guess. Her uncle was waiting. Hazel rode on the mail boat from Stonington. Her uncle was waiting there to drive her down to Portland, where she would attend high school. He lived in that city himself and had no children, but he also had no room for his niece. She was promised a bedroom of her own by a well-off Portland family. In return, she would act as nanny to their children while attending classes. She ended up sleeping in a small cranny off the kitchen with a curtain as a bedroom door. Going back to Isle of Haut was not an option. Changes had been happening on the island. By the time she graduated from Portland High School in 1935, there were only 75 permanent residents left. Hazel packed her diploma into a suitcase, said goodbye to the children she had cared for, and moved up to Bath to live with her sister and attend nursing school. It was her dream come true, and it changed the rest of her life. It was there that she met and fell in love with Philip Tardif, a welder at Bath Iron Works. He had been admitted to the hospital with pneumonia and was so ill the nurses checked on him often to see if he was alive. Hazel married him January 4th, 1937. He's probably cute too that the nurses were in there, right? Do any of you know how to pronounce the last name, the family name, H-A-I-G-H? I'm saying Haig, and I've said Haig for 2 years, and when I talked to the daughter who helped me with this, she's 83 or now 4, she pronounced it, and I thought, oh my God, I've been pronouncing it wrong. I bet it's very common around Portsmouth, New Hampshire, but it's not Haig. I'm going to say Haig tonight because I can't remember how to pronounce it. This is another one of the characters, Jimmy Haig. In Ports, and this is all just before, by the way, we're almost at the anniversary of the storm, and I'm going to be in Bath on February 17th, and that's the day one of these characters died, and that's where his son lives, his son who came to meet me. A total accident. In Portsmouth, New Hampshire, a busy seafood wholesaler named James Haig made plans to leave after midnight and drive his truck north to Maine, where he would meet up with one of his lobster suppliers. At 38, and after years of hard work, Haig was now self-employed. He had been a loom fixer in the local woolen mill when he and Eleanor Jackson first married. But he missed the smells and the sounds of the ocean. Now he was doing what he loved, and his company was thriving. Jimmy often stored his lobsters in cars, wooden crates with slats, in the back channel of the nearby Piscataqua, a 12-mile tidal river that marked the boundary between Maine and New Hampshire. When I started writing this book, I talked to some retired fishermen on Monhegan Island and other places, and I said to them, so help me. I said, did you just throw the lobsters in the boat? And they said, well, no. We put them in crates. You've heard of a lobster crate? And I said, oh, okay, yeah. You know, because in Allagash, you can throw trout in a canoe, right? I think that's where, and I was asking questions like, what is a pier, what is a dock, and what is a wharf? And I'll be damned if a lot of people can't tell me the answer who live on the ocean all their lives. So I had a lot of things to learn, and it was quite daunting. Those holding boxes kept the lobsters alive until he delivered them to local restaurants and grocery retailers such as A&P supermarkets. He and Ellie were running the James B. Haig Lobster Company, mostly in the kitchen. A large cooker of lobsters would be dumped in the open sink. Even their 9-year-old daughter, Barbara Ann, helped. Jimmy taught her how to remove the meat from the shell without breaking it. That's how his clients wanted it. The A&P chains, they bought their lobsters in cardboard boxes with plastic lids so that the meat was clearly visible inside. Haig decided to drive his truck up to Maine himself. He had plans to meet Harlan Davis before dawn. It was 140 miles north to Thompson. Then he would turn south for another 10 miles to Port Clyde, where Davis would meet him. They would be in Harlan's 30-foot boat and on the way to Monhegan Island before 6 o'clock. It wasn't the best time of year for trapping lobsters, But Davis had been in touch with the fishermen on the island. They were known for lobstering in winter. Their combined catches would fill 50 crates, each one weighing up to 100 pounds. There was also a wharf with a mechanical hoist at Port Clyde. If all went well, they would load the filled crates from the boat into Jimmy's insulated truck. He could pay the Davis and be back on the road to New Hampshire that afternoon. This is Harlan Davis of Pleasant Point. Harlan had known since he was a kid that he wanted to be a lobster fisherman. Like many boys in coastal towns, he was born to several generations of fishermen and sailors. He had grown up with half-round lobster traps, wooden crates, trap lines, and bait barrels. His father was a lobster fisherman. His late grandfather had been a smack man, visiting coastal communities and offshore islands to buy lobster that he would then sell on the wharf. His great-great-great-grandfather had been a sea captain, and his grandfather had been lost at sea in Indonesia in 1790. Fishing and the sea were in Harlan's blood. In the morning, a buyer from Portsmouth would arrive in Port Clyde before dawn. He had telephoned earlier to say he'd be waiting on the wharf. Harlan would pick him up, and they would be on their way to Monhegan before the sun rose. February was not the best time of year for lobster fishing. Many lobstermen lay low from December to April, mending their traps and lines and repainting their buoys. It was not the best time of year for good weather on the water either. The latest forecast had predicted a storm that would bypass southern and central Maine except for a few inches of rain, snow turning to rain. The ocean might be rough in patches with some minor gusts between Port Clyde and Monhegan Island. But Harlan was a seasoned fisherman. Now 30 years old, he had spent most of his life in a boat on the open water. A little bit of wet snow was nothing to worry about. Now this is Delaney, who's one of my younger guys. He's 20 years old in this, from Staten Island. He, before he enlisted in the Navy, and his daughter has been so helpful. Before he enlisted in the Navy, he was in high school, senior year, and decided that it would be fun to go to Mardi Gras for 2 weeks, so he and a friend took off to New Orleans in Mardi Gras, and when he came back, they expelled him. The principal brought him in and expelled him. So that's the situation he's in. Been kicked out of school. Having lived through those dark years after the stock market crashed, it was little wonder that the elder Delaneys saw the future different than their children. With no prospects now in sight for their son, they sat him down one night and suggested he turn his life around before it was too late. His father thought the military might be the answer. Paul V. Delaney enlisted in the Navy on October the 10th, 1950, becoming a seaman first class, the entry-level rank. When the good-looking New Yorker with his dark, wavy hair and hazel eyes turned up at the U.S. Naval radio station at Winter Harbor, he seemed a good candidate for the commander's prediction about the young men assigned there. "You will do one of three things while you are here," the commander told incoming sailors. "Marry one of the local girls, have a car accident, or re-enlist." Paul Delaney looked around at the fancy digs and knew he'd make out just fine. That's where Rockefeller built that station across, in Scoodic Peninsula. He knew he'd make out just fine. He had no intentions of a career in the Navy or any other branch of the military. He'd already had a car accident, serious enough that the police had come to inform his parents and scare the daylights out of his little sister. And at 20 years old, the last thing on his mind was marriage. But the local girls were certainly pretty. Paul had met one from Bar Harbor, a shy girl with shiny brown hair. Her name was Mona, and he liked the way she smiled. The next day was a Sunday, and Paul was off duty for a couple of days. So he asked his roommate if he could borrow the car. "I'll fill it with gas before I bring it back," Paul promised. "Just don't wreck it," Jeffrey said, and tossed him the keys. That's another character, my young sailor. And here is one of my favorite characters. A gentleman named Bill, a retired volunteer fireman, retired from Bath Iron Works, and a cat named Snooky. If you only knew how much I love Snooky. I found 2 newspaper articles about Snooky. Bill Dwyer and Snooky the cat. 67-year-old Bill Dwyer opened his front door and stared out at snow. This is Bath, Maine. Stared out at snow from the last storm, glistening beneath the porch light. He had been a widower ever since Nellie, his second wife, passed away 2 decades earlier. Bill expected that they would spend their last years together, but Nellie died suddenly at the age of 49. His loyal companion now was a yellow cat named Snooky with matching yellow eyes. Snooky had gone out 2 hours earlier for his nightly neighborhood prowl. The cat's paw prints leading down the porch steps and out into the yard were still evident in the snow. Bill could usually set his clock by Snooky's return. After a few bites from a bowl near the kitchen stove, the cat would then curl in the sofa to snooze. "Come on, yellow cat," Bill called now. He waited for an answering meow. Instead, the sharp sounds of metal against metal at Bath Ironworks drifted over from where the shipyard sprawled along the riverbank. He and the shipyard were born the same year. The third shift would come on at midnight, paid double for losing their weekend. Bill knew the schedule well. His riveting job had kept him there for 2 decades. But he was a younger man then. Riveting was a demanding, ear-splitting job, but one the crew took pride in. It was an art form, now being lost as more and more riveters were replaced with welders. It wasn't just about money, but speed. Welding was faster and saved time. Bill closed his front door against the nightly chill. He wasn't worried about the cat. Snooky sometimes met up with unexpected excitement down the street and forgot his curfew. He'd be home soon. Speaking of riveters being replaced by welders, I was having a pizza, I won't tell you what size, at Pat's Pizza today. My second, I had one earlier in Milo with Ron Knowles in September when we met. But I was telling the waitress, well, I don't know what we were talking about, how phones were making us so worried, how all this new technology sometimes seems useless. You get a phone, you don't need all that stuff that's on it, right? It's just cumbersome. So I said to her, I was thinking the other day what some old timers in Allagash told me. One man, George Gardner, said to me, well, I was 40 years old when chainsaws came in. I couldn't learn to use a chainsaw. I had never thought of that before. He was a cross saw guy, and a chainsaw, hey, you can lose a hand and a foot or an arm fast. I was too old to learn to use a chainsaw, he said. So when I saw that about riveters, remember that poem by, is it Edwin Arlington Robinson? There are no millers anymore, was all that she had heard him say. And he had lingered at the door so long that it seemed yesterday. Yeah, there are no millers anymore. So that's Bill and Snooky. Now here are my cousins from Brewer. I had to go all around the state. And these people, you know, I'm staying in the house in Bar Harbor that the daughter of one of these men said, look, my house, I rented all summer. It's empty. It's next to the Jessup. Stay there all you want. Yeah, you can get used to a house. Tourists rent in the summer. Okay, 19. So this is in Brewer. There's still a Morrell's seafood. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. It used to be Cap Morrell's Tavern across from the mill, but now it's a seafood place. They're a wonderful family, both of these, both sides of this family. It was a busy night at Cap Morrell's Tavern in Brewer on the outskirts of Bangor. Across the street sprawled the mill owned by the Eastern Paper Corporation. The company had received word a few hours earlier that the lumberjacks cutting their timber at the camp up north were no longer marooned in drifts of snow. The book starts with a prologue of the first storm of February 1952, which was a blizzard that marooned 100 lumberjacks and their horses and animals for almost 2 weeks up north, up near Baxter State Park. They finally got their way into Patton. This was the second northeaster, so I'm getting phone calls from everybody up north saying, I was born during that storm. I was in Madawaska. Or continually, they're talking about the first storm and not the one that the book is about. The tavern has steady customers and the local mill workers beginning at daybreak. Many men stopped in after the night shift ended to have a beer or two before heading home to sleep. The atmosphere in the tavern that night was one of celebration. Behind the bar, as usual, Jimmy Morrell kept the drinks coming. He was used to lively Saturday nights, but he had plans to shake off the work week, the way he usually did during the winters. He and first cousin Peter Godley, born in England, had their fishing gear packed. They would drive to Branch Lake at daybreak. Both 30 years old and still bachelors, Jimmy and Pete would throw together some sandwiches in the morning. Branch Lake was one of their favorite fishing spots, winter and summer. It was close, too, just a 25-mile drive southeast on Route 1A. The weather forecast for the next day had predicted a few inches of snow in the afternoon, turning to rain. Since they would be taking Peter's car, a British-made Hillman Minx, a couple inches of snow was no reason for concern. The Minx was like riding in an armored tank. They would bring Laddie, the German Shepherd dog owned by Richard, but whose affections were shared by the family. In the morning, when they packed sandwiches, bottles of pop, and homemade pastries, Jimmy would throw in a few raw hot dogs for Laddie. So those are most of my characters, except here's the one that I know some of you know a lot about. This is Sonny Pomelo, Ray Pomelo Jr. Susan is here, who helped so much. Oh, this poor woman, Susan Worcester. I drove her crazy with questions and documents, and so many people were so kind. How many of you knew of Sonny Ray Pomelo Jr. of Brownville Junction, Brownville? No, okay. Okay, because Milo and Dover-Foxcroft figured into this particular story because of the Kennison Funeral Home and the ambulance that was here and needing to go north. Okay, here is Sonny. Where is he now? 26 and 27. The evening whistle of the B&A train had already called the kids home from skating on the Pleasant River. Sonny Pomelo, skates slung over his shoulder, walked home with his friends. Overhead, the Big Dipper glittered in the night. Johnny Ekholm pointed at bright cluster of stars. Orion, he said. There's his belt. I just met John Ekholm in September. We went to visit the cemetery. Susan was with us and Ron Knowles, and we searched for a grave for like, a half hour? It's cold tonight, says Sonny. Even wearing his gloves, the tips of his fingers tingled. He shoved his hands into his jacket pockets. It's going to drop below freezing, Bobby Williams agreed, but that's a lot better than below zero. Some winters, they had seen the wind chill factor take the temperature down to 40 below. Well, those are the good old days. But so far, as the weather pundits had predicted, it was a mild winter for Maine. It's always warm out in California, Johnny reminded them. If everything goes as we planned, that's where we'll be in 3 years. Sonny couldn't imagine a place where it was warm all the time. There would be no heavy coats to button up or mittens and gloves to keep their hands warm. But there would also be no sliding down the hills of Skunk Hollow or skating out in the river or snowball fights from behind snow forts they had built themselves. And what must Christmas be like if everywhere you looked you saw palm trees? Maybe he would get used to it, but then they planned to be gone for just one summer. The Maine winter would wait for them to finish their adventure. See you guys later, Sonny said. His words hung frozen in the air. Before he turned and headed home to Stickney Hill, Sonny Pomelo stood looking up at the heaven of stars that blanketed Brownville. At times like that, when he was alone with his thoughts and the stars sparkled down, he felt like maybe God was talking to him. It was a mysterious language, as if the stars knew something he didn't, or maybe his grandfather Pomelo was sending him a message. A farmer once, the old man had passed away just 3 weeks earlier in a Milo nursing home. 85 years old, John Pomelo had been sick for a long time. But Sonny was too young to know his grandfather well, but he was one of 4 grandsons who were pallbearers. He didn't care for funerals, with the sad faces and muffled sobs of family members. Even the scent of all those flowers reminded him of a hospital. But Sonny had put on his best suit and helped carry the casket in memory of his grandfather. A Chevy pickup truck passed on the road and tooted. It was Donald Stickney, the man for whom Stickney Hill was named. Sonny waved his arm in recognition, hoping Mr. Stickney would stop. He liked pickup trucks, but he dreamed of owning a fancy car when he was older, maybe even a Henry J. They had been in production for about a year, but Sonny had yet to see one that wasn't in a magazine. He'd need a better job than shoveling snow to buy a car like that. When the red taillights braked a few yards down the road, Sonny ran toward the truck, thankful for the warm ride home. Now, here is the very ending. That's part one, setting up the characters. Here's the very ending of part one. When Bill Dwyer opened his door to call Snooky in for the night, no flakes were fluttering down over Bath. Cold snow from the last storm still sparkled perfectly beneath the streetlights. The weathermen had apparently gotten it right, and northern Maine would be the recipient of the incoming northeaster. There were no paw prints on the front steps and no sign of the yellow cat. Bill snapped off the porch light and closed the door. Little villages along the seacoast and inland had heard on their radios the latest weather update from WPOR in Portland, that a heavy storm was estimated to hit Maine the next day, a northeaster. And because nature doesn't think in terms of fairness, it would again concentrate on the northern part of the state. The rest would see a mild amount of snow that would turn to rain. Expecting the new storm to pass over them, coastal, central, and southern towns settled in for the night. They filled their furnaces with hardwood or loaded them with coal, then turned back the bed covers. For many folks, there would be church in the morning. While they slept, the storm moved north toward New England. That's the end of part one. I'm going to read one more page to give you a little sense of the drama of the book. I'm going to jump ahead. There is a quote I use in this book that is a true quote, and it is, "I know what you're thinking. The three of us will probably die trying to save one guy who will die also. Get in the boat. We have a job to do." That was Bosun, I think it's pronounced. I had to learn that, Boatswain, Bosun, Alton Wilson, during the Great New England Hurricane in 1938. Isn't that amazing? I know what you're thinking. The three of us will probably die trying to save one guy who will die also. Get in the boat. We have a job to do. And a little later on, I start another section with the Fisherman's Prayer, which is, "Oh God, thy sea is so great and my boat is so small." So here's one little section. The ocean was threatening to bury them. Water was rising in the narrow spaces around the lobster crates and streaming through their slats. Several stacked on the top tier had already blown into the sea. There was a pail Harland had kept on the boat for bailing, but the act would be useless. Even if they could get to the bilge, it would be like using a teacup. As gray seawater whipped over the side of the craft, they knew they had to lighten their load. While Harland stayed at the helm, Jimmy began lifting crates and throwing them overboard. To hell with money. This was now about living or dying. Wind and waves slammed the crates back against the sides of the boat. There is no doubt that the time came quickly when Harlan Davis and Jimmy Haig realized that the odds were against them that day. They knew they were a couple of miles from land. They knew the boat was overloaded with lobsters. They knew the temperature of the water was cold enough to kill them quickly. Even wearing the life jackets, it was a matter of minutes before hypothermia would set in. But a life preserver increased their odds of being rescued. They were now standing in water. It spilled over the tops of their boots and their feet and toes grew numb. Icy wind lashed at their faces and stung their eyes. All around them, the granite gray sky held nothing but water and snow. No matter how many crates Jimmy threw overboard, the boat was submerging, unable to carry both the heavy load and the wind-driven sea. The frigid water crept higher. A plunging wave dipped the bow, shorting the electrical system. The running lights blinked out. Their gloves soaked and their hands freezing, the boat was sinking beneath them. A wave slammed a crate back against Jimmy's right hand, breaking his wrist. His eyeglasses were knocked off and swept into the sea. With the stern of the boat now mostly underwater, he and Harlan clung to the spray hood. With little sensation left in their hands, the effort was useless. Maybe in those seconds before the mind-numbing cold set in, Harlan shouted, "Hang on, they'll find us." Maybe Jimmy shouted it. Then a new wave carried them both away from the boat and into the sea. Human beings are not designed to withstand freezing temperatures. Their bodies reacted immediately, a cold shock response, by hyperventilating. The life preservers held them aloft as the churning waves pulled them farther apart. In a few minutes, their thought processes would become jumbled and confused. But while they hoped, while they prayed, they floated like human corks in an uncaring sea. So, that's a little bit further into the maybe they got rescued. You don't know. Unless you read the book. You don't know. Who knows? So do we do a question and answer thing, or do we talk about the whale vertebrae? Wow.
It's all up to you, Kathy. I mean, if you want to talk about the whale vertebrae, feel free to. But.
I know nothing about the whale vertebrae. I'm going to just admit it. But that I love stuff like that, though. Yes, Janie.
This book was so fun to read. I'm a fiction lover, but just like from that scene where you said maybe he thought this, or maybe he said that, or maybe he hollered this, it's an interesting way you've pulled all your research together and yet pulled also your imagination about these characters, what might have been said or not.
Yeah. Well, you know, years of being a novelist, of course, I drew on that, because you do the same thing. You imagine, what is the motivation? What is the motivation? The Maine Sunday Telegram quoted me at the end of the story saying, I think I should have been an FBI profiler, which is what I'd like to be. I'm trying to, I might do a book based on an unsolved murder for my next book, another creative nonfiction. But it's all the same. You know, when you write fictional characters, I used to tell students when I would teach that we see things all the time. We learn things, we perceive things from the world around us, and it goes into our subconscious minds. And I said to them, there's a trunk back there full of all that stuff you've seen. And when you start writing fiction, you start tapping into that magical place, and it feels like 8 hours can go by and you think it's been an hour, and you wonder why your neck is not moving and your hands are stiffened. And every writer who does the kind of literary fiction will tell you that they feel they've tapped into something. And, you know, if you saw a woman at an airport in 1997 using her fork in a strange way, that goes into the trunk. And who knows in 2008 but what one of your characters might start doing that. You don't even remember having seen the woman, but suddenly your character wants to do that. They seem to have a life of their own. You've heard writers say that characters talk to them. Well, they do. They seem to have a life of their own. I'll usually get to a fourth or fifth draft and I'll say, no, you can't do that. I'm sorry. You know, because then you start treating them like a parent. No, I'm sorry, that's over the top. I wish I'd done that more in my Madagascar books, but so it's all about motivation, and I wonder, well, where did we get that? I think it was from watching people anyway, watching real people. What was their motivation? What made them? I drive my husband crazy. What made her say that word? I'll say to my husband, she used the word van. Did you hear that? And he say, oh God, Kathy, please, please don't. But that's where it comes from. And it's the same thing that an FBI profiler does too. So believe it or not, I sent that link to the story to a retired FBI profiler that I'm hoping I can attach to a TV show I hope to sell. One of the hardest things in the world to sell. And he wrote back, I think you'd have been a good FBI profiler. No. So I think that's just years of training. You know, a nonfiction writer is going to think differently. And let me say this, I'm going to be boring by the time I'm done on my tour saying the same thing. But here's the thing that I discovered after writing the Einstein book. God, don't even ask. I thought that up, that idea of proving Einstein's theory of relativity. I know nothing about physics. I never had a class in physics. I have no affinity to physics. If physics had been taught at Allagash High School, it would have been taught by the art teacher. But as I said, we didn't have an art teacher. So I know nothing about physics. And I came up with this idea and asked this physicist I saw on a TurboTax commercial. He ended up being the National Medal of Science recipient to work on it with me. That's when I realized that I've been writing fiction all these years, but I've been writing the truth, essentially. There might be some incorrect things in a novel, but if John got up and put on a blue shirt and looked out the window and it's raining and I write that as fiction, then that's true. That's my world. I created that world. I made John. I gave him his shirt. I control the weather in that world. So I was used to doing that for 12 books. Then I come to this book Einstein and later this one, and realize, well, wait a minute, this is real life. I'm not going to make this stuff up. I want to find the truth. That's why I found so many records and under rugs. And I had a woman in Bath named Carrie Nelson. I called her my indentured assistant. She was absolutely wonderful in helping me find. I say, find out if they've ever been married, or see if you can find the divorce record for them, and see what store was in Thompson in 1948 where he might have bought that. And then she'd find a store, and I thought, oh God, that's wonderful. Look at the sign in the window. See if you can find about that man who says that he's got a house for sale down there. Maybe there's something there. It just snowballed, But that was the difference in writing the Einstein book. I didn't want to do anything unless I knew it was true. For instance, when Einstein's wife left him, took their 2 sons and left him, should have a long time ago, but I'm just saying. When she left him on the train station in Zurich, Switzerland, he stood there and watched the train leave. I didn't say he was wearing a green shirt or a blue shirt because I didn't know. Now, if Mileva, the wife, my husband is half Serbian, half Croatian, he always corrects my pronunciation of that, because she was Serb. If she had said in a letter, Albert was wearing a green shirt the day the boys and I left, bam, I've got it. He's wearing a green shirt, I'm going to dress him. But I didn't want to do it unless I knew. And it became ridiculous after a while, because people do that all the time, even in a historic book. They're going to take so I was very careful. Then I got to this one, and then I really had to make up their thoughts and dialogue.
Yeah, that's along the lines of my question. Bangor Daily News on February 19th, just the day after the storm ended, has a lot of facts on the front page. Did you refer to that for your basic facts?
You're talking about 1952?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I had stacks and stacks of newspapers.
Right. And then also a comment, I thought your interviewing technique must be very good. You're drawing out details.
I'm surprised at some of the stuff they would tell me, but I've always been surprised at what my girlfriends would tell me in high school. I said, keep that to yourself. I'm going to tell that. I think writers I think people trust writers in a very strange way, because I know people from my hometown who tell me some very personal things, and I hardly know them. And I'm thinking, don't they know that I write books? And that I was accused of writing about a real Allagash, which I really didn't. I mean, people forget that I'm from Allagash. That's my sense of humor. That's my father and my brothers and sisters and grandparents, and I go all the way back to the founders. I'm writing about my own environment, but they would still turn around and tell me these incredibly secrets. I don't know.
You remain true to factual content, not implying to an extreme,
right,
unbelievable state.
Right. Yeah, like I'm not going to have Harlan Howard, like rob a bank before he goes out in the boat.
Right.
I think that's what you mean, right? It has to be.
Yeah.
Well, this is why I asked their children. They read several drafts. And there 2 of them are interviewed for the Maine Sunday Telegram story. I asked them, read this, tell me if anything in this doesn't sound, over and over, these people for 2 years.
Wow.
Mary Huerta says that she thinks I sent her over 1,000 questions in 2 years about her mother and family. Did she wear an apron? How short was her hair? What color? Did she sing? Did she swear? I found out quite late that she chain smoked. And I said, what? I didn't even think of asking that. She was pregnant. And man, that was the year, 1952. There's a lot of facts in the book, by the way. I look up a lot of research about Northeasters over history. Mark Twain got caught in one in 1888 in New York, and while he was complaining about shortage of cigars, a whole bunch of people died trying to cross the East River. They thought the ice was solid. Dozens and dozens of people drowned. Mary thinks that I sent her over 1,000 questions, and so there's a lot of research in that too. In 1952 was about the top peak, I think it was, or the year following or before, that the highest amount of smoking in this country. Before, and I think 62, there was this big scare about smoking, and it got headlines on the national news and remained headlines for like a week or so. Imagine that today. Don't smoke. Yeah, we've changed a lot, haven't we? Shame on us. I mean,
Because there are ads back, I don't know if it's the 40s, where they actually touted it as something that was
oh,
good for your health.
Hollywood stars and
Yeah.
doctors recommend that you smoke, you know,
Stay
Marlboro's
sharp.
better for your heart
Yeah.
than Winston, yeah.
Well, the military handed them out.
Yes.
The military handed them out, and they sent entertainers overseas to hand them out, including a whole bunch of country music stars from Nashville. They sent over there with free cigarettes to entertain and pass out. Yeah, I mean, we've learned a lot, but we still mess up a lot, don't we? Yeah. It seems like there was something else I wanted to mention. There's a lot of history in the book. How many of you know the name Joe Cupo, the retired weatherman? He was my weather guy. I drove him crazy. I drove a whole bunch of people crazy. I mean, they were so kind. Joe tried to explain, you know, a northeaster and a blizzard and blowing snow, and it was like physics to me. It just glazed my eyes over. So then I'd have to write everything down, because I'm a visual person. If I can see it written, I have a better chance of understanding it. And for one particular, the first storm in February, Joe said, I said, do you think that would have been a northeaster too? They don't say, they just say blizzard and bad storm. And Joe said, well, if I had the weather maps, I'd be able to tell you. But God, 1952, guess what? I found the weather maps. And he couldn't believe it. And because he was retired, it was fun for him to get back into the weather again, you know, and start finding this. And no, the first one was a blizzard with blowing snow, not a northeaster. And then a week later, this one hit. But there have been some northeasters in history that I write about that broke my heart. Well, some of you might know of this one it was 10 years after the Mark Twain one that hit New York in that area, 1898, when the U.S. Portland, beautiful ship, you know what I'm talking about, sailed out of India Wharf in Boston with 200 and some passengers heading back to Portland, Maine after celebrating Thanksgiving, and all of them died. They didn't find them until many, many years later, anybody. And all of those, like the Mark Twain one, for instance, and I did a lot of research on this because I was just fascinated with how storms have changed and our attitude toward them have changed. But the one in 1888, because there's pictures that you'll see of trains completely logged in snow. So that's when they thought, you know what, we got to put these trains below ground. We got to put our electrical wires below ground. And that, 10 years later, the subway systems began. The U.S. Portland, when it sailed north, it had been built at Bath, by the way. What a town for shipbuilding, huh? I had no idea until I started doing the research. When the Portland went down in that gale, they realized then that they would go for side wheels and not paddle wheels, and instead of wooden hulls, steel hulls. So out of these tragedies came improvements. I think part of our problem now, and I've just written a piece that my editor hopes to get as an op-ed piece in the New York Times. How much wood do we have in here to knock on that happening? But I wrote it. I think, as I said, Shakespeare might have said the fault is not in the snow, but in ourselves. Because listen, sometimes we just simply don't stay home, right? We take chances. That's what Harlan and Jimmy Hague did. They took a chance on the ocean that day. And a 96-year-old woman who knew Harlan in Pleasant Point said to me, every fisherman takes a chance on the ocean. You know, and I thought, wow, what a line. And so I used it, but I thanked her for it. Here I am, snowed in Presque Isle, Maine, a couple weeks ago when that cold hit. And by God, didn't I decide that rather than stay 2 nights at the lovely Hampton Inn, that I'm going to drive home. I've driven that road, I said. I did exactly what they did, and that's what I wrote about. I did exactly, because you know why? I wanted to be home. I worried about my pipes. I worried about my aging cat. I worried about my husband knowing the name of the plumber to call, because he's not from around, you know, he doesn't know what I know about the area. He's not from there, born. And before I knew it, that thought kept going around in my head, and I thought, I'm going to try it. There's some whiteout areas. Yeah, I've written about that for 2 years. I know what that can be like. But I'm going to, and I mean, I had Facebook people, probably you too, Janie, on there saying, do not leave that hotel. I had like Facebook friends saying, don't go. And my husband calling me, And I was ready to drive home. And the next day, here are the pictures in the paper of whiteout areas, all there, cars pell-mell all around there, you know? So we're never gonna decrease the numbers until, look, I spent almost 30 years in Nashville, Tennessee. And one of the things I used to say about moving back to Maine is that I can run from snow. I can't run from a tornado. And it got to the point where I just couldn't take the tornado warnings anymore. And my husband was trapped under an underpass once. One went right over my house once. I can run from snow, and apparently I haven't learned anything from that, though, just the same, you know? I still wanted to drive in it. Yeah.
Have you read Jim Murphy's book, 1888 Blizzard? Because your writing is very similar to his in the sense that he takes the characters of that time.
Wow, I wondered if anybody had done that.
Creates a story.
Yeah.
They call narrative nonfiction. Which
Yes.
I'm hearing is. Very
When did that come
similar.
out? When did it come out?
Years ago.
Oh, it has been years? You know, maybe I saw that in my
He
research.
also wrote The Boys' War and a couple others. Anyway,
Oh,
but
wow.
He
But-
tends to buy the archival photos and then creates the story
Wow.
behind it. And it's similar
Is
to
he
what
still,
you
is
have
he
written.
someone still writing?
Yes. I know, yes.
I wonder, I might have even seen that when I did the research. My research in that storm is not probably a couple paragraphs or a
Right.
page, you know,
Right.
it's,
The
1888
1888 storm that you're speaking of,
Yeah.
his book is called Blizzard. And it's
Wow.
Jim Murphy.
Oh, I
And
did see
met
that.
him
I,
years ago.
I
Years,
did
years
see
ago.
that.
And he spends like
Think-
ages.
Think of what a harder
researching-
job he had than I did, because 1888 is a different research period than 1952.
Yes.
You know, I mean, I was not born until the year later, but it's still something I'm familiar with. You know, I saw things of sisters and brothers and stuff my parents owned, and so I grew up enough to know. 1888's a lot tougher.
Right.
You got a lot more research to do there.
And
Yeah.
he did a Boys' War, which is the Civil War one. He's done a
Wow.
couple others with the underground, the railroad across the Transcontinental Railroad. But he writes from.
Wow. Where is he from? Not Maine.
No,
I remember the title because one time somebody said, "Do you want to use the word Blizzard in your subtitle?" You know, and then we found that that was a book named Blizzard. Yeah, well, I should read that if I had time to read.
The writing is similar to his in the sense
Yeah.
that he takes those characters and makes them real.
Wow. Well, I think that, now you're talking about the 1880, not the U.S. Portland
No,
sailing, because
1888,
that U.S.
and-
Portland would be kind of like a mini
He ties in
Titanic
Portland,
story.
Maine in the book, but he also references another the Chicago Fire.
Oh,
is another
wow.
book of his that-
Poor Mrs. O'Leary and her cow. I mean, she was wrongly blamed.
The one book I use in my classroom is
Mhm.
the book of the Chicago Fire, because each chapter he separates by a map
Wow.
of how the fire
Spread.
kept spreading.
Oh.
But
He's
he-
a
that
researcher.
whole book is the narrative of those characters and how
Wow.
it spread and why it spread.
Yeah.
So and basically the story of the calamity of errors that happened
Yeah.
that created the Chicago Fire. And so what he tends to do, much like what I hear you doing, is he collects those stories and then creates a narrative.
Yeah. I'm probably not going to do that again. I mean, I'm going to do the cold case murder, I think. But the Einstein book, I mean, I call it playing in the creative sandbox, you know, because I've written almost every genre now. I've got a middle grade novel, which means 8 to 10, 11 readers coming in July. And I took the Evangeline poem that Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote and made a prose version. I was very respectful of the first part. And then I changed everything. So that was a lot of research, in Carolina and New Orleans and everything in the 1760s. So that's coming in October. So, and I have a young adult I want to finish, and I'm working on screenplays, so I've wanted to always jump genres. So I don't think I'm going to do this again. I don't know, because it's addictive.
Never say never.
I know. And this murder case, her family is willing to work with me. It's a gruesome thing. Here's the thing. I'm doing a mechanics hall in Portland. Will you keep me apprised of the time, please?
It's 8 till right now.
Okay. What does that mean?
Everyone's enjoying
Another
it.
10 or 15 minutes?
We can keep going for a
Um,
while.
What the heck was I gonna say? Don't you hate that? Oh my.
You were going to Mechanics Hall.
Yes, thank you so much. That's when you're 36, you think it's totally. And Mel Allen, the editor at Yankee Magazine, is going to interview me, and there's still a reason. Well, it's gone now. Something I was going to mention about the,
You said something about gruesome murder and the murder.
yeah, the murder case. And what's so awful is this is being taped. Oh my God.
Just you.
But you won't remember.
Okay, changing the subject. Mel and I discussed whether or not we should mention this. I come from Allagash, as you know, born and raised in the house I'm living in right now, the family homestead. And Allagash was settled. I mean, there were pioneers coming and going, isolated men, hermits and loners. But Allagash was really settled by 3 sisters who came from Campbellton, New Brunswick, born of loyalist stock. Diamond was their last name, and they had been loyalists in Boston, who went up to New Brunswick, the way, as you know, many loyalists were promised things by England if they stayed loyal to the king, and went to New Brunswick and then almost starved to death in the winter. So they were part of the loyalist group up to Boston, from Boston, and then they were born up there in Campbellton, New Brunswick. They had grants from the King of England to cut white pine for his ships, and they left Campbellton, New Brunswick. There was 4 Diamond sisters in all. One came later. This is worth hearing, trust me. There was Anna and Elizabeth and Sarah and Lucinda, and they married a Gardner, a Henderson, a Mullins, and a Moore. I'm descended from Lucinda, who married George Moore, and I'm descended from Anna, who married John Gardner. Another sister is Sarah, who married John Henderson, okay? So that would be my ancestral cousins, and some Allagashers are directly descended from Sarah. I'm directly descended from Anna and Lucinda. Now, are you ready for this? Does anyone here ever heard that there's a famous actress who is descended from Sarah Diamond and John Henderson? Well, there is, and you're not going to believe it. I wonder if I should tell you.
Yes, you have to now.
Okay, you ready?
Yes.
Jennifer Aniston.
Oh.
Is that not stunning? So, the director who hopes to finally, after all these years of our trying, do my first novel as a film, director Doug Liman, when we first met and he wanted to do it, he hadn't done a film. Then he went on to do Swingers, and that became a cult classic, and now he directs big budget films. So this is a smaller budget period piece, and he just kept putting it aside. The producer at the time is Gabrielle Tana. She hadn't done anything. Now she's done The Dig, she's done Stan and Ollie, she's done all kinds of stuff. So it's time to do it. One of Doug Liman's films was Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which, if you might remember, those of you who like Hollywood gossip, was the film that broke up the marriage of Jennifer Aniston and Brad Pitt. So I keep saying to Doug, how well do you know Jennifer Aniston? Because I think we should have a Jennifer Aniston Day in Allagash. You know? I think that'd be amazing. I also think she'd be great in The Funeral Makers. You know her comic ability that she has? Dark hair for Cicely, the mother's, Amy Joy's mother, she'd be perfect. That comic timing she has is wonderful.
She was one of my favorite characters. I just reread that book.
Cicely?
And Cicely, and how she puts whatever she wants in the Bangor Daily crossword puzzle.
Yeah, she
Put it
makes
in,
up a
and
lot
then
of
it
stuff.
drove her daughter crazy because it wasn't the right word.
Do you want to know what's really funny?
I love that character.
Those of you who've been on Facebook with me, and if some of you are on Facebook and we're not friends, find me. I like letting people know about books and things. But I put on Facebook where I turned 70 last week, right? And how I still can't believe it. I've never not wanted a birthday to come before. But this one bothers me because I know I'm running out of time. It's not about age, really. It's that I'm running out of time. How many books can I write, you know? So I go back to The Funeral Makers, and Marge, the old matriarch who's in a coma, she's 59. I wrote that when I was in my 20s. Marge is 59. I'm 11 years older than Marge.
No, because when I was young, I thought people in their mid-70s were ancient. But then once you start getting there, it's
You
like,
wonder
oh,
how they laugh. You know, what are they so happy about? I'd hear my mother at the kitchen table with her friends, and they'd be roaring and laughing, and I think, why do they still enjoy life? It's gonna be so challenging for them, you know, and now we know they could care less about us, because, you know, I ignore like young people who are sitting in restaurants or things and getting all, you know, because we're unaware of what they care, what they think is important, you know, unless you're related to them. But you know what I mean, it's just, we don't care about that. We know what we're doing and we're happy with it, and we're doing okay. Does anybody else have anything to ask about the book, or Jennifer Aniston? That's pretty wild though, isn't it? So we're gonna bring it up in Mechanic Hall. We've decided, you know, Mel said, you think we should? And I said, you know, I've been hiding this for too long. My nephew actually sent me that, and you really, I mean, Allagashers know about it, but most people, I don't think it's ever been written up. Let me tell you how that happened. John Henderson, who married Sarah Diamond, one of the Diamond sisters, was born in Scotland. And then he came to Canada, and then they came to Allagash. They're buried somewhere in Allagash. Then their daughter married a McLean from St. Francis, Maine, and ended up living there. Then their descendant moved to Holton and married somebody there and had a daughter, and that daughter, Nancy, left Holton and went out to Los Angeles and married Mr. Anderson.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
This is so much more important than my book. It's so much more exciting. Does anybody else have anything to mention, or glad you all survived that freeze? Thank you, Susan, again, for everything you did.
Well, it seems people escaping from Aroostook County have all done well.
Well, Holton's not in Aroostook County. I'm pretty sure.
Yes, it is.
It is?
Absolutely.
My God. Well, I was busy
Isn't it
researching other
county
stuff.
seat?
Huh?
Isn't it the county seat?
I
Yeah.
thought Patton was. I mean, listen, when you say northern Maine, I've asked this question of people many times, and God, this is being taped, that I didn't know Holton was in Aroostook County. Are we sure of it?
Yes.
Okay. I've asked people before, what do you consider northern Maine, right? Because when I visited friends in Millinocket, all of their little slogans for snowmobilers, come to northern Maine, I'm thinking, you guys are in Millinocket, you know? To me, northern Maine is probably Patton. It probably starts at Patton and goes up. I certainly don't consider Millinocket northern Maine. Get a map.
The geographical center of Maine is just about 10 minutes north of here.
Yes. Yes.
Geographical center. So
Right.
we are in southern Maine, here.
Yes, I would think you are. Someone needs to let Portland know that.
Twice all the way to Augusta.
Well, you know, I mean, looking at a map is deceptive, of course, because you see where the road goes and how it goes up, and you tend to look at that, you know, because people will still say Allagash. I've been to Allagash, and they're somewhere down south of Baxter State Park, you know. The Allagash Wilderness, I think, is what they mean, and that's more expansive than the town of Allagash. How many of you were born at home? Anybody here? Born at home? Are you kidding? Did you have a midwife? It was during that, oh, okay. Well, I was born at home probably because Mama didn't have a ride to the hospital. I'm not really sure why, but I shouldn't say that on tape either. My father was working in Patton in the woods, and she was alone, so the doctor came from Fort Kent. But, you know, really, even for someone who is 70, that's rare in my generation to be born at home.
Bill's grandmother was hauled out on a toboggan when she was gonna have a
Wow.
baby from the North Road in Quebec out
Wow.
to Route 16.
Interesting. You know, it wasn't that storm though, was it?
I don't.
52?
I'm bad.
Because really, there were a lot of stories that could have gone in this book. I just happened to I selected the people who died, of course. I selected the people who died, and I selected other people that I could find a lot of clippings about and pictures, and I thought were interesting, but a lot of people, I mention a few in the book, women who were taken by sled to hospitals. One man, I tracked him down, and he said, well, I was 6 months old, I don't remember it. He was the baby that the Maine Sunday Times mentions being trapped at the Kennebunk exit where the only Howard Johnson's was in Maine. They had a baby there, 3 months old. They were passing around. It happened to mention his parents' name, and by God, I found the baby and mentioned him in the back. We had a nice phone talk. There was another man who walked like 2 miles in the snow to get salve for his son and to call for emergency because he scalded himself with coffee. All kinds of people were brave during this storm that aren't in the book. They're mentioned briefly, a few.
You
But
mentioned Dr. Card from Milo,
Yes.
the doctor who rescued Pomelo
yeah,
in Brownville.
well, he
Dr.
did
Card
the
was
autopsy.
my birth doctor in Milo.
He was what?
He brought me into the world
Really?
in 51.
Do you know, in the book, his wife and son were struck by a train.
Yes.
That's something else. In 1952, 10 people in Maine died being hit by a train, and 14 more were injured. Now, is that not astonishing? That's how dangerous railroad crossings were then, without any kind of visual lights or any kind of gates. And people had a thing about trains. I found the records for how many people had died in Maine for a year, not just Maine, but in the United States. And there were constantly people trying to run the train. You know? The train was this new invention type thing in their lives, I guess. I mean, it wasn't a new invention, but the idea of there's always something in every generation, isn't there? You know? I mean, maybe snowmobiles replace that now. But many, many people died. 10 in Maine in several months, not even a year. I'd written it down here earlier to tell you, but I can't find it now.
Did they say whether some of them were suicides though? Because that's
Well, yeah, they didn't.
I don't know.
usually if it's somebody who's caught on the crossing, but I
Yeah,
mean.
that happened. I mean, I was going to write the whole thing and put it in the book. That's another thing when you do something like this, is I cut out almost as much research as in the book, because you just fall in love with your research, you know, and you wear it on your sleeve, and you don't want anyone to. I had so much about Brownville's history, about, oh gosh, what was the name? The Silver something Hotel. There was an amazing hotel that. The Silver Lake Hotel, oh my gosh, I had so much about that. I had researched, and I'm sure you sent me a lot of it too, that I took out so many things, because you just have to eventually pare it down. Yeah,
It's gotta be hard. I mean.
it's very
to be
hard.
fresh and
Yes.
say when, oh.
Yes, this is why writers are a little mixed up. It's very hard. Yeah, especially if you spent a lot of time on it and you fall in love with the words of it, yeah.
Well, the good thing is, I think if a person reads the book and reads about a town and certain things about it, it triggers memories that will
Yeah.
lead into other.
Well, this is why, not you, but I think it was Dan Speed who's here. I write about his father, by the way. He's one of my favorite characters in the book. I would call people and say, I'd like to talk to you about the storm. Your grandfather was in it. And he said, well, I wasn't even born. Or I was only 3 years old. I don't remember that storm. So I would say, well, I wasn't born, and I'm writing a book about it. It isn't about whether or not you remember it. It's about asking questions about your family and asking questions like that, yeah. But yeah, Mr. Speed was an amazing character to write about. And his daughter, Becky, sent me some pages from his diary. And I just heard tonight that Dan Jr. says, I've got a lot of pages. Ooh. But I really got what I needed. I needed the day of the storm that he wrote about. And how many of you knew Daniel Speed, Sr.? Well, Junior is here tonight, which is an amazing thing for me. Another Speed son knocked on my door in Allagash and said hello. He'd been to my brother's shop. And as I told Dan, he never helped me with anything and interrupted my work. I thank him in the book for saying, call Becky, who's the sister who had the diary. I'm just kidding. So, what do we do now? We all go to the Bear's Den and have a wine.
Oh, yeah. It's good food there.
After we sign. Well, let's do that, and then it's 7 o'clock, is it time?
Yeah, it's just after 7, so.
Okay, everything I said that's being taped is private.
Well, thanks for coming, Cathie. We
Oh,
really
it's my
appreciate it.
pleasure. Oh, that's always good.